to what's happening in the stock market. My name's Mike Kydd, and I am the principal and founder of, excuse me, a regulatory and public affairs firm based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, called Kydder Group Incorporated. We specialize in regulatory affairs and helping governments and industry, specific industries in tech, certainly psychedelics. We pivoted our company in the last 6-7 months to focus a lot on mental health and psychedelics. And so it's one of the reasons why we're interested in this whole niche market as it starts to boom and explode. We want to talk to people who are on the front lines, whether it's you're working for Field Trip, whether you're proposing some interesting things with Numinous. There's all kinds of amazing things happening, a lot of information out there. And I think the most important thing is having an understanding of how that information is impacting not just the mental health and the palliative communities, but also how it's impacting people who want to invest their capital and hard-earned money and pensions and whichever the case may be. So what I've done today is I've invited a good friend here, the Psychedelic Bull, also known as Troy Sheehan. Troy's based in Denver, Colorado. We met like a lot of other people who have met throughout time on Twitter. And one of the things I love about Troy is as we've gotten to know each other, is he's an affable, really likable guy who people seem to really engage with his conversation on Twitter, with his information, his knowledge of the sector. And I could have easily went out and hired a stockbroker to come in, or a big stock trader to come in to do this presentation today. But I think what you'll enjoy with Troy is he has a unique story. He's invested a lot of his own capital into the industry, and I think that's going to help a lot of us get some their bang for their buck, if you will, during this session. So I'm going to turn it over to Troy in a second to give his own brief chat about his background and what he's doing. And then let's get right into the questions. I have a bunch of leading questions here that I'm going to ask Troy. If you want to ask a question, flip me a note on through the chat, and we'll get you to ask those questions, because that's what Troy's here for. So Troy, over to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that introduction, Michael. Thanks for everybody for joining in and taking time out of your day to join in, because as Michael said, I am just a regular everyday guy. I've got my normal 9-to-5 job. I've kind of been investing in the markets for about 8 years now, so always been fascinated by the markets. And when I really heard about psychedelics coming around, just back in March, I heard MindMed, Numinous, and all these companies were starting to go public. I started really digging into this. This was the beginning of COVID. And I didn't have much to do, so I was looking into the MindMed, I was looking into Numinous, just kind of putting my old experiences to look into these stocks to see, which ones are the duds, which ones are going to be the ones that pan out in the end. So, back in March, before nobody was even talking about these types of stocks, I invested, $40,000 into MindMed and $40,000 into Numinous of my own capital. I sold some shares into the company that I work for solely to put my money into psychedelic stocks, because I saw that this was going to be the next, boom, shroom boom, I was saying since March of last year. So, I decided to just create a Twitter just out of nowhere last April, just kind of share some knowledge with anybody else, just kind of get a community growing. And here we are today. I've grown to about 2,500 followers, all organic. I don't pay for anybody. People are just, like Michael said, they just enjoy my content of what I put out there. I like to, just kind of make people laugh while actually throwing some informative information out there for people to make their own decision on what stocks they want to invest in. So people might say, I'm a promoter or I'm a pumper or anything, but I haven't been paid, a dime by any of these companies that I'm out there promoting. I invested my own money because I believe in the future of, these medicines, is, what they technically are. I believe in the future of them. I think this is just the beginning. I haven't sold any of my shares. I'm a lifelong holder here. So that's just a little bit about me. Moved to Denver about 3 years ago, quit my job, moved out here, didn't have any money, started trading a little bit. So I learned a little bit about the markets, back then about 3 years ago. And, just decided it wasn't my time to start trading, and, it wasn't, a reliable source of income. So that's when I applied for, a tech startup. And this was pre-IPO. This tech startup was pre-IPO. So then 3 years later, this is now one of the, most popular tech stocks out there. The stock, boomed. So I used a lot of that money. I funneled a lot of that money from my, personal job right into psychedelics, because I'm a, lifelong believer in this, from personal experience and just from documentaries I've watched, and, just talking to people on Twitter saying how it's changed their lives, just having one psychedelic experience. So just having the ability to invest in the infant stages of something that, 5 to 10 years from now might be, what everybody's doing for, to cure their mental health issues. It's an exciting time for sure.
Troy, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing today. We all woke up, and by lunchtime, we're all looking at our phones and having a good understanding. The Dow Jones is down. All the significant stock indices are down. So tell us a little bit about what's happening around psychedelic stocks, because they all look down right now. So what do you think is happening right now?
Absolutely. And it just goes to show you, no matter what you're investing in, no matter how hot that industry that you're investing in, it doesn't matter unless the overall market is, being strong. When the overall market starts showing weakness, well, then that's when you're going to get a lot of, weak, short-handed, short-sighted investors that are going to panic sell because they believe that cash is king. They don't want to have their money tied into a stock and see 10% drop, and now they got to, see a 10% gain to get that money back, and then some on top of that. So, you're going to get a lot of weakness and just a lot of short-term traders selling their position, seeing a drop from, a 90-cent drop in 15 minutes this morning, just because everybody's panicking, thinking, oh, is this the bubble bursting? We've been on such a tear in the overall market for, 10 years now, and it's really been on fire this past year. So, anytime there's a big drop, sudden drop like that, you're going to get a lot of people panicking, thinking, is this the time that the bubble's popping? Is the bubble bursting right now? But in my eyes, and a lot of other people's eyes that gobbled up the dip today, they think that there's still a lot of strong months ahead. But you are going to get these panic sell-off days, because the market is a lot of emotion. When you're dealing with people's money, there's a lot of emotion involved. So there's going to be a lot of those, sharp sell-offs like that. But we want to see the big bounce backs like we've seen today. And those big bounce backs like that just make me confident that, it's just a slight correction. We're not going into a bearish, the upcoming months aren't going to be bearish or anything like that. It's just a slight correction in my eyes.
David Pelche, do you want to ask that question? Go ahead. You can unmute yourself. Go ahead and ask that question.
Yeah, you hear me, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. All right, cool. Sorry, I'm French, so I'll do my best. My question is, which first large market will psychedelic hit first, in your mind?
Okay. Thanks for that, David. And your English is great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, what was that question? Could you repeat that question?
He wants to know which first large market will psychedelics hit first. So what I think he's asking is where is it going to have the most impact in terms of mental health? Is it going to take off in tech? Just where do you think it's going to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the market that's going to hit first, and already is, seeing it, is going to be the psychotherapy aspect. There are a lot of, Canadians already that are getting exemption for end of life psychotherapy to ease their end of life anxiety and stuff like that. So we are already seeing, nonprofits out there that are doing the psychotherapy. And Compass Pathways, they are the leader right now. They have the most cash, and they are in phase 2B of their depression study for psychotherapy and using psilocybin. So that's going to be probably the first one, to market, is going to be the psychotherapy aspect. That's going to be where the money is going to be made, is in the psychotherapy. So I think that the psychotherapy part is going to be where it's at. And Field Trip, Field Trip Health, they're out there doing ketamine clinics right now. So they have places in Atlanta, New York, where you can go and get a ketamine session. But it is going to be for the more higher end market right now, since health insurance does not cover this stuff right now. So you're going to have the money to be able to pay for the sessions right now until we can get health insurance to start covering this type of stuff.
So you mentioned Field Trip. They're a Canadian company, and for all full disclosure, I do some work with Field Trip. So I wanted to make sure everybody knew that off the top. But they are an interesting example, because if you look at their price in their stock movement, they seem to be stable throughout most of the dips we've been seeing in the market. So talk to us a little bit more about that and what you're seeing with respect to some of these bigger companies that are, they're still pink sheet stocks, they're still penny stocks under that $5 mark, but what is it that we should be looking at with respect to these companies like Field Trip and Numinous and Compass Pathways and MindMed? Is there something on their executive levels that we should be looking at to get a better sense of the company and what their stock might do in terms of performance?
Absolutely. So it's going to always come down to who's got the best execs, who's leading charge here, and what's their vision. So it is going to come down to that. But, right now in these early stages, a good thing to keep an eye on is the market cap of all these companies. And what the market cap is in layman term is, how much is this company worth today, based on where the stock price is at. And right now MindMed is valued at $1 billion, and they're not generating any revenue. They're not going to be generating any revenue for a couple of years probably. So some people may say, why are they worth $1 billion? But then some other people are going to say, well, they have years and years worth of data, and they're in phase 2 trials right now. So, it's not just going to go from 0 to 100 once, phase 3 trial is complete, the drug's on the market. There's going to be a steady trend over time based on what the trials are doing. So keep an eye on the market cap, and just ask yourself those questions. Is $1 billion valuation, worth where this company's at today? Maybe they're a couple years out from revenue, or maybe they're like Field Trip, where they're actually generating revenue right now. That's a good thing to see. You want to see revenue right now. And if you are looking at Field Trip, every quarter, look at, is their revenue going up every quarter, or are they just stagnant? Are they just getting, they're opening up all these clinics? Well, then they better be generating more revenue. That's the purpose of opening up all these clinics, is generating more revenue. So it would be maybe nice to pair like a Field Trip with like a MindMed, who's years from maybe revenue. And then you have that company that is generating revenue right now. And then just watch that market cap and just ask yourself, is this capitalization, worth where the company's at right now? And that's what the market is trying to figure out right now. What are these companies worth at this stage in the game? Maybe in 10 years from now, maybe they're $100 million companies like a lot of other pharmaceutical companies are. Or maybe their trials don't pan out, and then they're just, they're nothing in the end.
I think, Troy, if we see some of these trials not pan out, that could spell doom for a lot of folks in this industry. That's certainly been hyped up. Rad, if I say your name incorrectly, I apologize, but is it Rad? Siraj would like to ask you a question. Rad, I just unmuted your mic if you want to ask that question now.
Sure. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Troy. So my question is, and this could be a little bit of an amateurish question, but I think it counts.
Nothing amateur, my friend.
Thanks. So much like you, Troy, I've been dabbling in this space, both out of personal conviction, but also the opportunity here. And I'm curious, how does trading volume affect the overall price movements you're seeing here? Is it any different? Is that correlation any different for these psychedelic stocks versus, any other microcap biotech stocks?
Yeah, so obviously, you always want to see volume in the stock. You want to have liquidity in the stock that you're seeing. And as you're going to see, MindMed is clearly the leader in volume. They're always going to be the leader in volume. So then that's when they're going to have, sharper sell-offs, is because there's going to be a lot of short-term investors that are piling in. So whenever there's more volume, then you're going to have more sharp corrections in the end. Field Trip, as we mentioned, has lower volume, so there's definitely less liquidity. Sometimes that's not good if you're a short-term investor, but if you're a long-term investor believing in the long-term where these companies are going to go, that illiquidity, means nothing. In the future is when the liquidity will come, when they're, blowing out their earnings, their revenue keeps growing, the volume will come in the end. But if with Field Trip, they have one of the lowest volumes, but it keeps going up. So that's telling me the people that are going into this stock are just buying. There's nobody selling. So if there is low volume, but the stock's going up, that's just as good as if there's a lot of volume and the stock's going up. It doesn't make a difference. If it's going up, that means it's more buyers than sellers in the end. And that's what you want to see.
Great question, great answer. Thanks for that, Rod. It leads me to another good point. A lot of the executives or the founders and the co-founders you're finding who are entering this industry. And I'll mention Ronan Levy with Field Trip, for example, is one who kind of cut his teeth in the cannabis market and did well, and then transitioned over into psychedelics. And a lot of people look at that and say, okay, is this just another big? Is this cannabis 2.0? Or give us a little bit of insight into what you're seeing in terms of the difference between the cannabis stock boom and now what we're seeing with the psychedelic stock boom.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll notice a lot of similarities with the original boom that's going to happen, because there's a lot of retail investors that came into cannabis because they said the same thing. They think this should be legal. There's no reason for cannabis to be illegal. So there was a lot of retail investors that piled in with cannabis. There's a lot of retail investors that piled in with psychedelics. So I think the initial boom is going to be pretty similar. I think they're all going to go on an initial boom at the beginning. And then there's going to be a lot of consolidation that happens after the initial boom. And with cannabis, you didn't see a lot of institutional capital come in, because it was federally illegal, and they don't, a lot of institutional capital can't, invest in anything that's federally illegal. So what's different with psychedelics is they're going, the FDA route where everything's legal. So when you're doing that with the pharmaceutical route, you're gonna get the institutional capital that comes in right away, which didn't happen with the cannabis. So then that's when a lot of retail investors got dumped on, because just kind of federal legalization just kind of didn't pan out as quick as everybody thought. So companies were just losing money hand over fist, and then they had to raise a bunch of more capital. And that's what I was seeing in cannabis, lots of money being lost. They were just buying companies left and right with the money that they had. So they were just losing money. Whereas psychedelics, I think they're being more conservative with their money. They're not just going and buying out companies left and right. They're like, hey, I raised a bunch of money. Let's put this towards our trials. And if the trials pan out, well, then, that's when more institutional capital is just going to keep piling in as those trials go along. And, there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence. There's anecdotal evidence everywhere you look on Twitter that says, yes, I've taken psychedelics to get off of, addiction, that I've been addicted to this stuff for my entire life. And I did one session, I'm not addicted. So just all that anecdotal evidence out there just makes me a believer that, these trials will proceed and, go through to the final step. And, that's why, in my opinion, psychedelics will be bigger in the long run than cannabis, because when you can deal with health insurance and going through the FDA pathway and getting these drugs to market, you're dealing with multi-billion dollar companies versus, recreational cannabis. It's still a big market, but, not anything compared to health insurance.
Yeah, that's great. Listen, I got another question for you from Sean Hall. Sean, go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, Troy, what's up?
Hey, Sean.
I was asking, how do states like Oregon, who just passed legislation for using like certain drugs that were like illegally, that were in the past illegal, how does that affect like the psychedelic market and, like regulation from the government also?
Absolutely.
Great question.
Great question. Yeah, and that is going to be a big part of, what's going on. Is there's going to be the phase trials that are going on, but there's going to be a lot of regulation that needs to happen in the meantime as well. So when Oregon, it takes that big step to make everything, decriminalize everything, that's a huge catalyst for the market, especially because with what Oregon is doing as well is they're making psychedelics available for, therapy and mental health treatment. So not only did they decriminalize in Oregon, is they're allowing, psychotherapy to become a thing. And once they do that, Cali's another one that just did another bill. So Cali's going to be a huge market, that jumps on board, and they're looking to do the same thing. Let's make, these therapies available to anybody, that needs it. So those are huge catalysts anytime, a state in the US or Canada or anywhere, in the world goes ahead and pushes through legislation and regulation, because that's when we're talking health insurance, and health insurance will start getting involved. Health insurance will start paying for these therapies. And these therapies, if you talk to anybody at MAPS or, watch MAPS Twitter, which MAPS is a nonprofit, they're saying some of these sessions are $7,000 to $10,000 if you're going through the full therapy session. So that's just one patient, $10,000. So once you get health insurance to cover, 8,000 of that, and then it's only $1,000 to the patient, well, then that's when you're able to scale it out. More people are able to do it. More word of mouth gets out there to more people about these medicines. And that's when you really see, psychedelics really continue to just take off.
Yeah, and thanks for that again, Sean. Scott, I'm going to get to your question in 1 second. I do want to point out as well that when it gets to the regulatory environment, not only is it Oregon with Measure 109, and California, which is having a huge impact, but you're looking at states like Florida as well, who's just introduced legislation and a bill in their state legislature, who's looking to bring in and actually regulate and legalize psilocybin for medicinal and therapeutic purposes. Connecticut is another one that's coming through. As the states start to align behind these measures and these goals, how much of an impact would you say countries like Australia, Canada, the UK are having an impact? Are we sharing these resources and working together, or is this still very much a disjointed effort for everyone to kind of rush to get to the podium first?
Right, and I think that's a great question. And I think that's it's a great question for regulators. Like I saw Australia, they turned it down on, their first, they were the first opportunity to say, yes, let's make MDMA, psilocybin available to, people that, no other treatments are working for them. And that's where it needs to start is start with these people that they tried every other pill out there. They're on their last, rope basically to say it, and they're just looking for anything. That's what we need to make it available for is start with those people, and then kind of branch off from there. And I think what's going on is I think some countries are just afraid. I think that's what Australia said is they're just kind of afraid it's too early for them to be the first ones to do it. I think they were just kind of afraid to be the guinea pigs of it. So it's going to come down to a country or individual states putting their foot down and being, saying, we need what's best for our citizens. And right now with COVID and mental health and suicide rates going up, through the roof and stuff, like now is the time, for regulation to be changed. If these governments really care about their citizens, now is the time to do it with everybody that's out there struggling. So I think it's a positive. We see states like Texas and Iowa, even Iowa here in the United States, which I've lived in Iowa for most of my life. And they're in the Stone Age when it comes to even cannabis. Like they don't even have medical cannabis there. So the fact that you're seeing these states, accepting or at least starting to look into this, it just shows that it's, a bigger market, in my opinion. They see that this is going to actually help people's lives, whereas, cannabis, they're still in the Stone Age and, don't realize that that's a plan as well that shouldn't be, illegal.
Yeah, and I do want to point out as well, Mind Medicine Australia they are in the process of submitting a rebuttal to the interim decision that was made, and that's due next week. And I know they are doing some really good work in pulling together what they feel is a very strong rebuttal and argument to that. So, hats off to them, and all the best to them as they move forward on that. And I guess the other point too is with Health Canada. Health Canada, as you know, and a lot of people here know, has gone through the Section 56, the ministerial exemptions through Section 56 of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. Now what's happening is they've taken public consultations over the last 60 days that ended on the 10th of February and are reviewing changes to the legislation that will remove psilocybin and MDMA from the restricted list and allow, special access to patients who are suffering with serious and life-threatening illnesses. So there's a lot of really good things happening in Canada right now, and I think people should be encouraged and excited about that. I'm going to turn it over to Scott here. Scott, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I appreciate your time, Troy. Just had a question on what your thoughts were as far as Field Trip reporting earnings last week, and then the stock kind of taking a dive, and kind of see what your thoughts are around that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Scott.
Absolutely. And, you are going to see that sometimes, a lot of times in the market, where a stock just it gets a little overextended. Everybody is buying because they were anticipating the earnings. And then once the earnings drop, you're going to get a lot of short-term traders that are going to kind of sell the news and look to just buy in at a lower price. So, everything with the earnings, looked fine. 200,000 in revenue, I think it was, which was like a 230% quarter-over-quarter increase. So everything looks good there. They got cash in the bank. So moving forward, if you are an investor in Field Trip, just keep an eye on those revenues, make sure that they are going up, because like I said, they're opening up all these clinics everywhere, so they should have more revenue coming in. So keep an eye on the revenue. Eventually you like to see that translating, to some profit. But what you want to see is just increasing revenue at this point, and then obviously a good cash to debt ratio. So they have a lot of good cash on the balance sheet, not a lot of debt, so that they're not having to raise a bunch of money, and they can kind of use their revenue to fund their growth. That's I think the intriguing part of Field Trip is they have revenue that can kind of help fund future growth, whereas MindMed, they might not have revenue for a couple of years. So, once they're out of cash, they're just going to have to do another raise. But hopefully by the time they have to do their next raise, they have plenty of positive news so that their stock price is higher, which means they have to give away less shares. That's the nice thing with every raise that MindMed has done, is they've been at a higher stock price. So they have to give away less shares, less dilution. That's what we all want to see. But, Field Trip's a good one to monitor moving forward. I think there's a lot of promising stuff going on there.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Scott. When for people who are just getting involved, whether you're just getting involved or you've been involved in trading stocks for years, when you see a 20% drop in any stock, there's always some room for concern there. But that is the nature and the way the market fluctuates and stabilizes itself. So it does bring up another good question, though, in talking about how we invest in psychedelics. You think of names like Bruce Linton and Ronan Levy and J.R. Ron with MindMed. These are some of the bigger personalities that are starting to come out, and they're speaking. They're getting a lot of attention. They're gaining good Twitter followers. And it was you that told me, and I didn't even know this, that J.R. Ron had talked about he wants to be the Tesla of mental health. Talk a bit about what the words some of these entrepreneurs and executives are using, how that's impacting their stock.
Yeah, absolutely. So JR, from the beginning, JR has been always out there doing interviews. He's been getting his name out there from day one, back in March, since I started looking into it. And I like that. I like a CEO that's out there. He's kind of putting a target on his back. And he really did that in one interview he was having, which had about 3,000 live people that were watching it. Him and Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary, were doing an interview, and JR came out and said, I essentially want, MindMed to be the Tesla of mental health. And he knew it, right when he said it, he said, I know that's, putting a target on my back, but, I'm accepting that. So when me as an investor, I liked seeing that because, you know, that is a big target on your back for you to just say, hey, I'm the Tesla of mental health. You know, to say that, you know, you have a lot of confidence that your company isn't going to go away and fade away anytime soon. And with that, his Twitter followers have grown immensely as well. When I first started following JR, when he actually followed me back pretty early as well, he had like 400 followers on Twitter, and now he's up above, you know, 2,500. And that alone right there can influence a stock. You know, him just tweeting anything out can influence a stock. Him doing merchandise for MindMed, you know, can pump the stock itself. So I think, you know, him putting that target out there put a lot of confidence, you know, in his company, and really put a target on his back that he has been embracing since day one.
You're just saying that because you've got so much invested in them, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. But you know,
No, all kidding aside, though,
little disclosure, I do have 105,000 shares at my the full disclosure. But like I said, I've been holding. You know, I could right now cash out, you know, be up a bunch and go on a vacation if I wanted to. But no, I've taken this big dip. You know, I've taken it to the gut. I've taken plenty of big dips like this. And in the end, it did bounce back. You know, it did bounce back in the end, and I gained that money back in the end. And I am a long-term investor. I have a long-term aspect on it. But yeah, absolutely. It's gonna come down to which one of these can, you know, get their name out there, but also execute in the end. It's gonna come down to execution in the end. You know, some of these might just be fluff companies in the end, but you know, MindMed, they have good trials ongoing. They have a confident leader, and they have, you know, some of the most cash in the game. So that's a recipe for success right there.
So, and I think I know, Scott, you have a question there. Rod, did you have another question?
Yes, I do. Do you want me to go first or Scott?
You go right ahead, sir.
Okay. Well, thanks, Mike. So on your point, Troy, do you feel like, so I saw an interview with JR a few weeks ago, and where he mentioned, you know, when they first went public, there was a couple of thousand shareholders. Now there's like 127,000, of which there's like a large portion are retail investors.
Yes.
Do you feel that, you know, retail investors, especially those with like long-term thinking and high convictions, are going to play a bigger part in especially something like psychedelic medicine stocks versus sort of these other like game stocks or whatever?
Absolutely. And that's, you know, from day one when I invested into this, that was my vision, is there's going to be a community that grows from people that have just had personal experiences with these drugs, or they know somebody that had personal experiences, or they've seen documentaries out there on people that have. So they're in for the long haul. You know, this community, when they bought, you know, they're the true diamond hands, you know, is what I like to call, you know, this community is they're the true diamond hands. A lot of people that are investing, when they invested their money, they said, you know, I'm not going to cash out. You know, this is a 5 to 10 year investment. So they went into it with that mindset from the beginning. So I think that's huge. And that's why we're continuing to see the uptrend that we're in, is because everybody's just holding. And everybody, you know, anybody that's been in, you know, from the early stages, or, you know, even if they got in this past month, are in the green. So everybody's just kind of holding it, you know, riding it out, riding the wave while it's hot. And having those diamond hands, you know, is a huge part of it.
Yeah, that's a great point, and we'll circle back to that. But Scott's got another question about some recommendations on stocks. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It was just I just wanted to see what your top two picks were out of the market, other than MindMed, you know, Field Trip, and maybe Numinous.
Yep. So Compass is another one that I'm invested in. I think they're the you know, obvious leaders. They have the most cash. They're in phase 2B trials, so they're going to be the closest, you know, to getting anything to market. So I think Compass is a good one. I think a lot of people just don't like Compass because it's the highest, you know, stock price, but, you know, I think it could easily double, you know, as these trials pan out. And, you know, if you're putting your money in it, anytime your money can double, you know, that's a good investment. But a lower, you know, some of the lower priced ones, you know, Trip Therapeutics, that's one that a lot of people, a lot of buzz around Trip Therapeutics. I like what they have going on there. They're dealing with like fibromyalgia and using like psilocybin for that kind of stuff. So they're going a different route than a lot of these other companies are, which I think makes them a good investment, is Trip Therapeutics. So that's one I plan on loading up. I don't have any position in right now. I will, plan on adding to Trip Therapeutics. So that's a good one that I highly recommend.
Troy, talk a little bit about diversification and ETFs. I think that kind of scoops in on Scott's question with respect to, if you want to diversify a bit and get a good feel for which stocks, talk a little bit about that and what's going on.
Absolutely. So that Psych ETF that was created just, made it legit that this sector is not going away. Big money was like, this sector is not going away. Let's create an ETF to track this sector. So what you can do is if you don't want to follow all the companies and you just kind of want to, have a little less risk, you can invest in the ETF, which, just has exposure to all of the psychedelic stocks, a little bit of exposure to all of them. So, if all those stocks go down, the ETF will go down. But if all the stocks kind of go up, well, then the ETF will go up as a whole. So you can always invest in the ETF. I think there is like a management fee that they charge for the ETF. So there is that you're going to be paying on top of your gains. So if you don't want to do that, what you can do is just keep up to date with the purchases and the holdings that the ETF has. And you'll see right now that Numinous, Compass, and MindMed are all like 10% holdings of the, the weighted, of the entire fund. So you can just take a look to see, what companies are they maybe adding shares, adding more of a, percentage increase to fund. And then you can, obviously look into those companies and invest in those companies. Because if they're, buying, bulk shares for the ETF, well, then that's a lot of, support that you're getting from institutional capital. So there's two ways you can go about it: either invest in the ETF or just pay attention to what the ETF is buying and then just buy those individual stocks.
Yeah, I think that's a real fair point. And one of the things that we had talked about before was the fact that Compass is a NASDAQ rated company. It's an uplisted company. So talk a little bit about that. Maybe people don't understand the differences between the indices and how that works, and what kind of value that puts into the stock, into the company.
Absolutely. So Compass is the only one that is on the NASDAQ right now. And the NASDAQ is one of the highest tier exchanges here in the US. So that gives you exposure to institutional capital. And if you look at the numbers for Compass, like 80% or some high percent of their outstanding shares are bought up by institutional capital. So it shows you that institutional capital is highly interested in this area. And when you're on the NASDAQ, they can invest in you. But when you're on the OTC markets here in the United States, a lot of the big institutions will not touch you, because over the counter stocks may be seen as a little bit more risky. You're getting a lot of your pink sheet, penny stocks that are not legit companies. So they won't invest in you. So, MindMed back in the end of September, they filed to uplist from the OTC quality boards to the NASDAQ. And that usually takes, they say like 3 to 5 weeks or something like that. So they're past the times that it takes, which I think they're just going through a lot of regulation stuff right now behind the scenes. And I think what they're waiting on is they needed an annual report from MindMed before they can, officially uplist them. But the day that MindMed does uplist, I think that's a huge catalyst, because then we can get institutional capital to come and invest. That's what we're missing with MindMed right now. We have a lot of retail investors that are excited. They're holding on to their shares because they believe in the long-term vision of this. But we need that institutional capital to come in and give us some more support and raise that stock price up. And I think it's just a matter of time. I think it's imminent, because MindMed, they've filed all of their quarterly reports on time. It's clearly a legitimate company. Mr. Wonderful has invested his money in it, so he's done his due diligence. He's not just going to stick his money into a pump and dump kind of stock. So all these factors, I think, are just creating a perfect storm so that when the NASDAQ, hits, it's going to create a lot more hype and attention.
So Troy, just to be clear, these companies, or these what did you call them again? Institutions,
yeah.
Institutions who are backing companies that are on the NASDAQ exchange. It doesn't necessarily mean they don't want to get involved in psychedelics. They're just waiting for more time and more clinical research, kind of like maybe what the regulatory environments are doing in each country across the world right now, who are being bombarded with a lot of requests to legalize and regulate. I want to bring up one other point, and it's more of a policy area, and you might be able to comment on it, you may not, but there are, within that organic movement around psychedelics, and I can speak right now in Canada and the United States. I know Missouri's doing an incredible job of trying to decriminalize psychedelics and even cannabis. Is there a conflicting message there when you have governments being bombarded from the left with respect to decriminalization and from the right on legalization? Do you think that's going to have an impact on why people may stay out of the market right now because they're waiting to see what happens and which way that goes?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's plenty of smart money sitting on the sidelines right now that says it's just too risky for me to get in right now. Let's wait to see if regulations hit. And then that's when I'll get in. So yeah, there is plenty of money that is still sitting on the sidelines. And then that's when, when people say, oh, the shroom boom, maybe it's over now, maybe that, initial boom we had, that was it. But no, it got these stocks on a lot of people's radars, and a lot of people are still just sitting on the sidelines because they don't want to take that risk right now. Especially with, they don't know if the markets are going to be choppy or if we're going to stay, going bullish in the overall market. So they're just kind of sitting on the sidelines and taking their money out of these more risky investments. But for anybody that wants to take a little bit of risk, don't throw your entire life savings into it. Throw a little bit that you're willing to let sit for, a couple of years, couple of months to see where this goes and where regulation goes. And if regulation continues to improve, you can always add to your position. That's what I always, tell anybody that reaches out to me asking, is now a good time to invest? I still think, yes, it's absolutely the early stages of these companies, but it is going to take regulation approval. It is going to take these trials to pan out. So slowly, get into a position. Just don't go all in right away. Slowly add to your position. And that's just kind of what I recommend everybody when they are looking to get into these.
So you talked a lot about, the things to be looking for on the positive side and why you should get in. What are some of the red flags that we might be looking at in terms of, you talked a bit about fluff companies earlier, and especially those pink sheet market stocks. What kind of red flags would scare you off?
Yeah. Any red flags that would scare me off is, no regulation, regulation not going through. And then also like CEOs of the companies or insiders of the company dumping their shares. If you see insiders from these companies start dumping their shares, well, then what does that tell you right there? They don't believe in their company. Obviously they're probably in it for the shroom boom. They're just trying to get in for the hype, the hype phase, dump all their shares. And then, the retail investors get dumped on in the end because, these people were just in it for the money from the beginning. So keep an eye on that. What insiders are holding on to their shares. How are the trials progressing? How much cash are they burning? Are you being smart with your cash, or are you just, burning cash left and right and not getting anywhere with your company? So stuff like that, especially, selling shares is something I'm going to be watching heavily, over these next few months to see, who are the true believers in their company and who are the ones that are just trying to make a quick buck.
Interesting. Any other questions out there? We've got about 13 minutes left, and if you want to ask a question, go right ahead. I'll leave the floor open to anybody who wants to ask. Okay, you're gonna leave it to me, right? Okay. So any thoughts on?
Yeah, I'll say something.
Please,
Mike, what about what's Troy? What's your thoughts on eHave, the technology kind of play? in the space.
Yeah, so I've heard a lot about that one. I haven't invested any money in that one. Is that, if you remind me, that's just that's a technical on the tech side, right?
Yeah, it's EHVVF, I think is the ticker.
Yep. So one of my good friends, that I trust good on his, due diligence as well. He's been big on EHAVE for a while, and I think he's made some good money off of that. So he's a firm believer in it. I haven't looked into it much, but I have seen a lot of buzz, around it in general. So the main things I would just say is, watch their cash balance, how much money are they burning, and watch to see if their insiders are holding on to their shares. If they are, then they're a believer in their company. And you've got a winner.
All right, any other questions?
I got one follow-up.
Go ahead, Rod.
So Troy, what do you think about some companies like Midas Innovation Group, which seems to be undervalued, and there's not much movement despite them having a great team. They just raised what, $17 million.
Yep.
There's other companies like that. I mean, I find Cybin's pretty fascinating too.
Yep. Cybin and Midas, I see a lot of people are big into those. And they both do have a lot of molecules, in their pipeline. So I absolutely 100% agree. I think there are some that are kind of flying under the radar. And those types of stocks are good ones to put a little bit of money into. Because when this next boom hits, all the psych stocks are going to benefit. You're going to find ones that are all going to go on a run at some point. So you're going to be able to make money off of pretty much all of these in the initial shroom boom. That's pretty much happening right now. And I think will continue to happen maybe for, a couple more months at least, until we maybe see a little bit more consolidation until trials pan out.
I want to, that's a great question. And it's something that, it reminds me of something that Ronan had put on his LinkedIn account a few weeks ago, maybe last month. But he said that in 10 years, we will look back at psychedelics the same way right now we look back on the early advent of the internet. Yeah. And I thought that was such a unique contrast, and with respect to where we could actually be in terms of our consciousness and our mental health post-COVID. Okay, we're in a massive mental health crisis. I will use that word not so carefully. It is a massive problem right now, not just in Canada, but right across the world. And one of the challenges I find within the psychedelic community is that governments and politicians are certainly willing to listen to what the industry is bringing forward and some of the challenges that it will address on the mental health side, anorexia, all kinds of different behavioral and neurocognitive disorders. What I'd like to know though is, what is it going to take to get them to actually not just listen, but to hear what we're saying? Because COVID is not just, is just not going to go away and we're going to, pick our bootstraps back up and go play in the yard again. This is going to have a deep and profound lasting effect on economies and societies across the world. Do you think we're meeting that challenge right now? And when a government, say like Australia, comes back and rejects an application like Mind Medicine Australia's, saying that we need more clinical trials, do we not have enough anecdotal evidence and research that shows the efficacy of these studies and these medicines right now?
Absolutely. MindMed has 10 years worth of data at least on the benefits of these. And Compass is in phase 2B, showing that there's 80% or some crazy percent of remission in these treatment resistant depression clients. So there's plenty of data out there right now. I think once Compass gets to phase 3 and some of these public companies get their trials through, I think it's just a matter of there's no way they can ignore the data. And if they do, they're going to get a lot of pushback from people that are going to say, literally look at the data. How are you letting people go out there and struggle with mental health when everything that's out there on the market, is not helping right now? How are you able to turn down this data? And, I think at that point, you just cannot turn down the data. And if you do, then, you just clearly don't care about the citizens that, live in your area.
I agree, and I think that's the point I'm trying to make is, you know, the different experts and research that I've spoken with. I think I see Sanjay Singhal on our call today, who runs the Nakian Foundation, you know, supporting research all across the world and doing incredible work. You know, and he'll be the first to tell you that what he has seen and what he's accomplished with his foundation is amazing. Sanjay, if you're willing to speak up and talk a little bit about what you do and what you're seeing with respect to the data, I think that would be helpful to everybody.
Sure, Mike. Thanks. Thanks. Let's see. What am I doing? I mean, we fund research across a variety of molecules and indications. Psilocybin for anorexia, MDMA for anorexia and depression. And we're looking at 5-MeO-DMT now through USONA Institute, a nonprofit, doing the preclinical studies, because unlike MDMA and psilocybin, there wasn't a ton of prior data on people using 5-MeO-DMT. Nobody thinks it's unsafe, but the FDA needs to see the research first. And that's the drug with the largest commercial potential because of its short duration of action. So that's going to be very exciting. And of course, USONA is not the only one. I think Troy would know there's lots of companies looking at 5-MeO for potential treatment. The one thing you know, that, you know, I follow the markets closely in this space, and I you know, I think anybody who knows me well knows that I'm involved with Field Trip pretty closely. Because, and the reason I am is I originally wanted to open up clinics. I think clinics are the way where most of the money will long-term be made in this space. And when I ran into that team, it was like, oh, these guys know more about what they're doing than I ever would. So I gave them my money, thank God, rather than my time. And that's done really well. It's ridden the shroom boom to date. I also want to mention, and so I apologize for missing the first half hour. And Troy, you may have already said this, but you mentioned that there may be a slowdown in a couple of months and maybe a later pickup. My understanding is that Thai is likely to go public in like the May timeframe, and that's going to cause another shroom boom. Right, is my expectation. Right? Do you agree with that?
Yep, absolutely. I think, you know, a Thai going public, as well as, you know, MindMed possibly uplisting right around that time as well, could certainly create a second, you know, shroom boom. And then that's what I think, you know, during the summer periods, it's just when the markets in general are traded a little bit slow. A lot of people take their vacations, you know, not many people are paying attention to the markets. So just kind of the summer periods are just a lot more less volume within the entire market. So that's just why I think there would be a little bit of consolidation, you know, after that next shroom boom that happens, consolidation until more trials come out, you know, more revenue starts generating with Field Trip, you know, another, you know, catalyst that would get it going after that.
Do you know, is there any way to know, because MindMed talks about its uplisting a fair bit. There are other companies in the space, though, that have applied for uplisting or well down that path that don't publicize it. Is there any way to know what's actually going on versus what just MindMed tells us? Like, does NASDAQ have some kind of a, I don't know, open process?
So you can search online what is the process from, you know, uplisting from NEO exchange to the NASDAQ. And you can see what each step is. And I think the last step that they're missing is they need like a full year audited balance sheet, you know, all audited statements is what NASDAQ would need. So I think that's the last missing piece is what
it's 6 months. Someone just mentioned it's 6 months. And to go back to Sanjay's question, does the NASDAQ not have to publish that information with respect to the process?
Right. So really what I've seen in the past is if somebody's rejected, you're going to know that they're rejected within that 4 to 6 week time frame that they give you. They're going to come out and say, you know, you're rejected because of this reason. And a lot of the times it was because the companies weren't staying up to date on their financials. They weren't, you know, filing with the SEC on time. So they weren't in compliance. So they wouldn't be able to get to uplist because those were a lot of the shady companies that aren't keeping their books straight and, you know, not doing audited financials and stuff. So I think that that's what they're missing, is that audited financial statements to give them that. So the NASDAQ would have told us by now if they were rejected. And that's why I'm saying, it's a no-brainer. It's not a matter of if it happens, it's a matter of when, in my opinion, because they filed all their financial statements on time. They have plenty of 100,000 retail investors invested. So that makes a difference, and where their stock price makes a difference. So they pretty much check every box, and I think it just comes down to that annual financial statement.
Yeah, we have a couple minutes left here. Does anybody else want to ask another question before we shut down? Okay.
Can I ask one here?
Please,
Mike?
absolutely. Go right ahead, Sanjay.
Because you mentioned, or Troy mentioned, Mr. Wonderful investing in MindMed, and that always struck me as kind of a double-edged sword. Because I wasn't sure, was he just given a bunch of stock and then he lends his name to it, or did he actually buy a bunch of stock? And is there any way to know?
Yep. Well, I'm going based off what the interviews that I hear, and they have, talked about that. And JR reached out to Mr. Wonderful one time, and Mr. Wonderful said no, so he shot him down one time. And then based off the story from the interviews, I've listened to plenty of interviews, he reached back out to Mr. Wonderful. Mr. Wonderful had one of his team members audit MindMed, so review all the statements, grill JR left and right about everything to make sure it's a legitimate company. And then once he approved that, then they invested their actual money into the company.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it goes to another point. Sanjay, if you want to follow that up, go right ahead. But before you do, just one last quick question here on my part. Where press release advertising with respect to trying to boost stock prices, it's something that's gaining a little more critique online. Are we seeing too much of it right now? Do you think companies need to slow down and just kind of focus on what they're doing internally and then tell the big news?
Absolutely. I think that is a good thing, especially, nowadays everybody's kind of looking, it's just becoming too much fluff, too much fluff news. So a lot of people are just starting to sell the news because they're like, oh, well, if this is the only news you have for me, well, then I might as well sell and wait a couple of months, maybe until, you actually have some good news to come out with. So, promoting their companies and, fluff news and all like that, it is something to keep an eye on, which ones are just trying to get their stock price to boost up, and, which ones are actually coming out with concrete, good information. So definitely something to keep an eye out, as we proceed with these.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important, and is a benchmark for me when I'm investing. Any last questions for our good friend, the Psychedelic Bull? Troy, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, feel free anytime to reach out to me at Psychedelic Bull. I get a lot of people, that I'm, a lot of followers that reach out to me, and, I respond back to all of my followers. If they reach out to me, feel free to, just shoot me over a message. I'll get to it whenever, I have some time, and we can chit chat about any questions you have or whatever. Otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Troy Sheehan. I am on LinkedIn as well. And definitely hope to keep everybody, I'll keep everybody up to date with, my holdings, anything that I'm, looking to get into, as well as just the overall industry as a whole. Because what I like to do is just provide information to people and then let people make their own decisions on what they want to invest in. So feel free to reach out to me, and, I hope to, keep everybody entertained in the process.
Yeah, Troy, thanks very much. And I will let everybody know that Troy and I'm going to preempt him a bit here, but we are talking about potentially putting together a partnership with Kydder Group and the Psychedelic Bull on a potential podcast, which I think Troy would be, an excellent resource because he's so well read and so, upfront and affable, as I said earlier on. So, Troy, I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody who tuned in today. Much appreciated. I will be sending out a copy of this this interview with the next couple of days. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any more questions. David, I just seen your question there. Yes, I will be sending it out. Troy, you're the best. You're awesome. Thank you so much. Sanjay, thanks for contributing, and everybody, I appreciate your time and your interest in this very interesting field. Stay tuned because next month we're going to talk about regulatory and political affairs and how it's impacting the industry. So thanks very much, folks. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, everybody.